Hello and welcome to our first ever Twitter Space discussion that we titled Why the EU Needs to Walk the Talk on Climate Policy. It's great to be able to host this session and I hope we have a very great experience here over lunchtime. For me, I just have a tea here. I will have lunch later, but maybe some of you will already have some food here. I'm Klaus Röhrig. I work for Climate Action Network Europe and I will be facilitating this session now for the next 45 minutes. So why are we here together? We are here because next week the European Parliament plenary will vote on the EU climate files and part of the Fit for 55 package that is meant to address the climate emergency that we are in. So what better time to now come together and then bring together also voices that we can raise awareness of some of the sticking points in the legislation that is coming to the votes. So especially for you this lunchtime, we will be serving a selection of topics from the EU's Fit for 55 package that was launched last year in July. And we also have a fantastic group of experts with us. So let me just quickly introduce them. We have Alex Mason. He's the head of climate and energy at WWF European Policy Office. Welcome, Alex. We have Chiara Corradi, climate officer from Transport and Environment, TNE. Then we have with us Ola Hansen, director of public affairs at H2 Green Steel, and we have Sam van den Plas, Policy Director at the Market Watch. So very warm welcome to you all. And also behind the scenes, we have Rachel Brabants and Brigitta Bosso from Can Europe, who will be organizing your questions. So yours, all the listeners, to our experts today. Maybe also just a quick note. We might have also Michael Bloss, a member of the European Parliament from the Green Group, joining us a bit later, but he is still in a group meeting. And also to say that we reached out to other political parties to our event, but sadly they were unable to make it. So we have to see if Michael will still join during the discussion. He might come in a bit later. As I said before, we will have now 45 minutes. For this debate to go a bit through the 3 climate files that we want to discuss today. And then also you can join this conversation by sending us a DM, a direct message. And you can also directly react to the discussion using the reaction buttons. And we will be using our hashtag EU Walk the Talk for this discussion. So feel free to tweet along using this hashtag. So without further ado, let's get started and let's serve up our starter topic, which is ambition and urgency. So we know that the votes that are taking place next week are actually taking place in the context of crises. We have the ongoing war in Ukraine. We have the EU's necessity to become much, much quicker independent of fossil fuels. We still, of course, have the pandemic and the health crisis, rising inflation, energy prices increases, and then, of course, overall looming the climate and environmental emergency that we are in, and that also will be addressed, or that the EU has promised to address through its policy. In the past, the EU has been a strong defender of the Paris Agreement and also of the target to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. But we still see that the world is still very much off track and that also EU policy is not aligned with this ambitious target of the Paris Agreement. So now it's the moment where the European Parliament and all EU policymakers have to urgently deliver ambitious, robust and fair legislation. And the votes next week will be a very important moment to do so. So I invite maybe for the first round all speakers to come in on the question, why is it that this plenary vote actually matters? So what's at stake and why should the EU go now for higher ambition, climate ambition, and why is it possible? Maybe if somebody wants to come in as a first speaker, please feel free to respond. Or maybe I have to put somebody on the spot. So this was meant to be for me, this part. But maybe Alex, maybe ask you to come in, and give a bit your take on the question. Why are the votes that will be happening in the European Parliament plenary next week, will they be so important to raise the EU's overall ambition on climate? We have the votes on the EU emissions trading system, the ETS, then the effort sharing regulation, and also the LULUCF regulation. So why does it matter? Why are we talking about them today?
Yes, hello everyone. Yeah, I mean, as you say, the votes next week in the Parliament cover the sort of main pillars of EU climate policy. So, as you said, the emissions trading system, covering sort of power sector and large-scale industry, the effort sharing regulation, which sets national targets for sectors such as road transport and buildings and agriculture, and then the LULUCF sector, so the land use change and forestry. And taken together, these cover essentially all of the EU's emissions and removals, which are obviously very relevant to the climate emergency, even though the EU is only obviously a part of global emissions, but there is no route to meeting the Paris Agreement targets that doesn't involve the EU making very rapid and dramatic cuts to its emissions. And the EU has set this target of a cut in net emissions of 55% by 2030. We think that actually falls far short of where the EU really needs to be if it wants to contribute to the goal of keeping climate change below 1.5 degrees. We think it should be aiming for at least 65% by 2030. And as you said, this comes against a backdrop of much greater focus on the need to cut our dependence on fossil fuel imports through energy efficiency and much faster rollout of renewable energy. And so what the Parliament decides in plenary next week will send a very strong signal, I think, internationally of what the EU thinks is required, but also to the Council and to the Member States in the EU who are separately also discussing these different policy dossiers and currently in the process also of finalising their position. And so far we've seen less appetite amongst the Member States to increase ambition and really to take the climate emergency seriously. And so the Parliament, as we see it, has a key role in encouraging higher levels of ambition and pushing for increases in the different targets that are covered by the legislation, and therefore leading to an overall increase of ambition compared to 55%.
Yes, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Alex, indeed. But we also, of course, see or we hear many voices now saying that also in the context of the war and with rising energy prices, we need to be cautious about moving too quickly on the ambition. So what would you respond, or also others, please feel free to come in, but what do you respond? How, what does it mean to now go ahead of ambition, or how would you respond to those voices that would say, in this current context with the war in Ukraine, with rising inflation, we have other things to care about. We shouldn't overdo it on ambition right now.
Well, I think the answer, as we've seen in the Commission's Repower EU communication, to the dependence on fossil fuel imports, which is what's driving the high energy prices that we see at the moment, rather than carbon pricing. The solution is precisely to invest more rapidly in energy efficiency and in faster rollout of wind and solar, particularly, as that is certainly in the medium term and in the short term when it comes to energy efficiency, that is the solution to high energy prices and volatile energy prices. So I think that the two things go together, and the difficulties that people are facing with high energy prices are one of the reasons that we think that there needs to be a very robust social climate fund, well funded, that can help people on lower incomes particularly to insulate their homes better and to take the steps that help them adapt to the high energy prices that we're currently seeing.
Thanks. Yes, indeed. This is also a new or kind of a very central element of the package that is going forward, where we also have to make sure that those synergies are being made, especially with the social impacts of climate policy. And of course, that we shouldn't also forget that we are still then discussing the kind of sometimes a bit invisible or impact of inaction. Well, they are actually becoming much more visible each year as well, but it's also somehow very much a bit absent from the discussion if we fail to do enough to keep the 1.5 goal attainable. We will, of course, also face much higher challenges and costs in the future. And now, next week is really one of the vital moments where EU decision makers can make a difference. And maybe also just to remind them that just 2 years ago, the European Parliament actually already voted in favor of going beyond this 55% overall target in the European climate law votes, where we had a majority that supported a 60% target. So particularly those MEPs should now walk the talk basically and be making sure that also the package that is now on the table becomes fit for 1.5 here. I just maybe
Klaus,
yes, Ola, please come in.
I was lost for a while there, but now I hear you all again. And
perfect.
I can just highlight what I think what Alex said here, that coming from the industry and industrial startup H2 Green Steel, I fully agree that it's even though we have the situation in Ukraine, it's definitely not the time to make any sort of lower ambition in any way. It should be really the opposite. It will help us. We have short-term, of course, emergencies in different ways, but medium-term and long-term, we should set these targets high on climate and on energy efficiency and renewable, and also provide means to take action in the near term on this, because this will help us to solve also the dependency on Russia and the fossil fuels.
Thanks. This is of course very important also message to come from the industry field as well, and something that will probably bring us also now already to the next section. But maybe before we go and dive a bit more then into the specific files that will be on the table, just a quick question to Rachel: whether any DMs or questions that we should still address on this first section?
No, we haven't had any DMs so far, so I'd like to open the floor to anybody if they have any questions for our experts today. And the direct messages are always open, so feel free to @Tangle with your question. I'll open the floor for questions now.
Great, thanks. Good invitation to everybody. If you have burning questions, don't hesitate to send DMs, and we will. Our colleagues Rachel and Brigi are busy looking into the feed, so they will then be able to bring them back here to the experts. But then, let's move on. We have a very full menu, as you know. We now have a bit of the maybe hot potato starter with the first file that will be on the table next week, which is the EU's carbon market, so the revision of the EU emissions trading system. And here we have one of the big hot potato issues next to the ambition is the free allowances that are handed out to industry for free. So one, or actually in place a bit as a transitionary temporary measure to shield European industry against carbon leakage, or the fact that maybe Europe has stricter environmental protection than other regions. This has become very a central barrier in the EU's climate policy architecture to the transformation and the needed decarbonization of industry. And now, again, this vote of the revision is kind of a key opportunity for the European Parliament and for EU decision makers to really make a structural change and to really improve and really incentivize the needed transformation of industry. So here, maybe specifically reaching out to our key speakers. So Ola, who already came in the first part, Ola Hansen, but also Sam van den Plas from Carbon Market Watch. Maybe the burning questions for this section would be, why is it that ending these free allowances to industry is so paramount and so important at this very moment? And also, what do you then see as the best solution to actually get industry on track to reach climate neutrality in the next decades? I don't know what's to go on. Yes. Do you want to come in? Yes, thanks.
Yes, thank you, Klaus, and thanks a lot for putting this hot potato on the menu here. And I think this is also critical to look at, not only taking us back to the urgency discussion you had earlier. The European emissions trading system covers a bit less than half of Europe's greenhouse gas pollution, but underneath the hood there is also what I call a bit of the hidden scandal of European climate policy making, and this is related to the staggering amount of free pollution permits which are still being handed out today to industry, and which will continue to be handed out up to 2030 or even beyond if we're not careful in the European Parliament next week. Even the European Commission, the way they propose this review of the ETS directive, keeps about 5 billion free emission allowances available to heavy industry like steel, cement, and the chemicals sector. A couple of others, they have smaller amounts of emissions. And this comes at a real cost. It comes at a real cost because the external consequences of the carbon pollution will still be borne by others in society. You and I and everybody will face the consequences of an ever-warming world. And the second cost is more an economic one, a direct economic one, which are the fact that these emission allowances are handed out for free is that they will not be auctioned by the member states, who will not receive revenues. The monetary value of these free emission allowances, which is at play, is around, depending on your carbon price assumptions, around 400 billion euros in this trading phase between 2021 and 2030. So I believe what we are really talking about is what is the distribution of effort between all actors across society. As you know, parts of the ETS are proposed to be expanded to transport and building sector. As you know, also the majority of the emission reductions under the EU ETS has been achieved in the power sector as a consequence of successful deployment of renewable energy technologies, the targets which have driven energy savings, etc. And there is one part of society which has been basically sitting on their hands for the past 10 years. The sectors like steel, cement, and chemicals have hardly delivered any emission reductions, and this needs to change. The fact that they receive free emission allowances is, of course, no stranger to this problem. Any logical economic reasoning can follow that if you do not have to pay for their pollution, where is your incentive to decarbonize? And this is what, unfortunately, we have seen in the past decade, and for another decade again, if we're not careful. So the responsibility in front of policymakers and the European Parliament next week is to make sure this ETS helps to decarbonize industry. I think they also, and I hope Ola can talk about that a bit more from the steel sector perspective, they have good ideas and they do deserve support. But at the same time, we need to make sure that there is a fair carbon cost, which is paid by industry, and then that they decarbonize in the longer run. So this needs to be a fair transition for everybody, and the handout of free pollution subsidies to large polluters should end as soon as possible.
Thanks a lot, Sam. Yeah, I think a very, very important point to also open this element of the social justice discussion in this whole debate on the free allowances issue. That it's not only about the kind of business case, but it's also really, it really puts into question also the kind of social balancing and the sharing of the efforts that are needed for the entire economy. And also looking into the very short time frame that we are having. I mean, if industry they need to be to reach climate neutrality within the next decades, it also bears a bit the question, if now we procrastinate this needed change and we miss this opportunity next week, how does industry then actually want to still pick up the pace to land where they need to land eventually? Ola, you were already addressed as well by some. You represent maybe a bit of an unusual voice coming from the steel sector, but would also be very interested to hear your take on the question of free allowances and maybe the challenges for industry.
Yeah, you hear me?
Yes, very good.
Good. Yeah, thank you, Sam. Just to start with, I mean, what we've been asking for is that we wanted to see a full phase out of free allocation already by 26. That's what we've been asking the politicians, the policymakers, and also that these allowances should be auctioned and the revenues should be used to support investments for those actually taking climate action, investing in really reducing the emissions. And I think, we of course we see now in the Energy Committee the two competing proposals was full phase out by 2030 and the other full phase out by 2035 potentially. I mean, it's not what we wanted, but then it must be the 2030 proposal that really should be the one that should win in the voting here in the plenary, or any compromise being very close to 2030 as a message, I think. And the background here, maybe there was a case long ago when the ETS started. The technologies in cement and steel were not really there, but now the technology exists. We will build two greenfield plants that will reduce the emissions with 90 or 95% compared to the best plants with the current steel industry process, the blast furnace. So there are technology exists today that really can make major emissions, and there are also possibilities to do stepwise investments that reduce emissions by at least half as well. And I've also having contact now with the cement industry. It's the same case there. There is materials and technologies you can use in the near future or already today that can decrease emissions by at least 50%, maybe up to 70%. So that the fact that there's no technology out there is not the case. But of course, this comes with a cost, and the players like us, front runners in the steel industry, but are the same ones in the cement industry, we need a level playing field. We have processes that unfortunately they cost us more. If the incumbents get the allowances for free and don't pay for their emissions, should they start paying for their emissions, then we have a much better level playing field. So that I think that's really the case. So. And there's another aspect as well in the benchmarks, the product benchmarks that is governing the free allocation. They're supposed to be technology neutral and not depend on the process you use, but in fact they are very process specific. So there is a total lock-in to stay in the existing technology. If you invest in a new technology, you lose the existing free allocation. So I mean that's also why the free allocation must go, and before it goes, we need to make these benchmarks really technology neutral. So there is also an incentive, not like now, it is disincentives to invest. Clear incentives to invest until the free allocation is phased out. So I think all these asks, we ourselves, we have pre-sold a lot of significant part of our volumes, and we get a green premium. We get this extra cost paid for. Our customers are willing to pay an extra price for the green steel versus the brown steel. But ideally, we would be able to sell our green steel, the steel price would increase to some extent, and we could compete with the brown steel also on price. And I think that's what's needed if you need to lift the whole sector. Like front runners like us, there are front runners in our customers that will pay a premium for our green steel. But if you want to lift the whole sector, you really need to fix the ETS and create a level playing field.
Yeah, thanks, Ola. I mean, this is of course like even another side of the scandal. I think about the current regime of free allowances, that it even impedes the actual incentive structure for those front runners that are already out there and that have also invested in the past to get on this path of decarbonization. Yeah, very good points that you raised, and thanks also for joining this expert round. Maybe just allow me to do another encouragement for our listeners. You can still also send DMs, you can still send questions, and we're happy to also pick them up and bring them back to our speakers. We maybe have just quick time for one very, very short last, maybe one question that is a bit on my mind here, also in this free allowances issue, is a bit talking to MEPs we know this is a massive challenge. MEPs are really under pressure to actually change this. What do you think are here the biggest barriers? Is it really the kind of the kind of power that also industry has vis-a-vis the MEPs, or what would be our best way to actually overcome this this challenge that we are facing a bit against the incumbents? maybe some
Yeah.
just a quick reaction to this. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I believe there is good news here as well. But let me start with the bad news. It's not, those industries are generally not in an easy position currently, and we are very mindful of that. There is in some of these sectors we've been discussing, there is structural oversupply, there's too much capacity, investments are not taking place in Europe, there is lack of demand for those sectors. And in addition to that, the upfront costs of the capital for investing in the cleaner technologies is very significant, and Ola already alluded to that clearly. So the problem is those industries will not get their acts together on their own. And this leads them, of course, and I don't think we should blame them, to protect their short-term economic interests, which is why these industries are arguing very clearly to policymakers in the European Parliament and elsewhere to keep as much free pollution subsidies as they can for as long as possible. We see statements by the European steel industry, and H2 Green Steel, to be clear, is not part of Eurofair, where Eurofair says that the outcome of the Environment Committee vote is life-threatening to them. At the same time, the Environment Committee still awards 1 billion free emission allowances to the steel sector. So I wonder what type of life-threatening aspects they are talking about, but it's certainly not the consequences of unlimited global warming, because I think that's, when you look at the IPCC reports, that's where life-threatening is clearly defined. So the good news is that by not handing out the free emission allowances, auctioning revenues could come in, and I do think also from the NGO community there is clear openness that those auctioning revenues can and should be dedicated also to support clean industrial transformation. Projects which deliver, for example, fossil-free steel or zero-carbon cement production in Europe, they deserve support, and the revenues could be generated by phasing out the free emission allowances. So there we have a solution which basically catches two birds with one stone.
Yeah,
could I also? Yeah,
I'm afraid, Ola, we have to move on. I'm sorry.
But it's also, I mean, most of it is traded on internal market as well, both cement and steel, and the CBAM will, in that sense, protect the market. So you will get a better revenue in slightly higher on your commodity. So I think that's something that we never heard. You'd only heard about those who will export, but that's a limited share. So I mean, it will be profitable for these companies as well with CBAM and the phase out. But it's something new, and I think that they are afraid of that. So I think those voices aren't heard either too. And it's good to get that through to politicians that these companies will still be profitable after CBAM and full phase out.
Yes, indeed, and also shows very different interpretations of life-threatening, I think, from the different sides. So thanks a lot to both of you for coming in on the ETS. Let's now move to the next file, which is the effort sharing regulation, which is a bit the Swiss cheese of the package because it has a lot of loopholes. So it's still a very culinary experience. And I would like to invite Chiara Corradi from Transport and Environment to join us here and explain a bit this effort sharing regulation that sets national targets for member states for all the sectors that are not part of the EU carbon market. Why is it a bit like a Swiss cheese at the moment, and what can be done to maybe make it a bit more aligned with this Paris Agreement targets of 1.5? What is at stake here mainly?
Hello everyone, thank you, Klaus. Yes, indeed, the effort sharing regulation is a little bit of a Swiss cheese, but unfortunately, I must say, because it's key in the EU climate strategy. As you said, as you already mentioned, it sets binding emission reduction targets for EU countries. The sectors that are covered are road transport, buildings, agriculture, waste, and small industry. So altogether, they represent more than half of EU emissions, so quite a significant share. The ESR is crucial because it gives the incentives to governments to put in place the right measures at the EU and at the national levels to put in place the right investments to cut emissions in those sectors. So it brings huge benefits for the EU citizens because, for example, these measures could consist in increasing the energy efficiency of buildings, meaning that citizens would get lighter energy bills. And it also increases our chances to meet the Paris Agreement goal, so to meet to stay below the temperature increase of 1.5 degrees. But not only decarbonization, so cutting emissions also mean ending the dependence on the fossil fuels, which is even more important in the context of the Ukraine war. So for the ESR is essential, but the ambition of the national targets has been set. But what is key now is to avoid that these national targets are carved out. So as you said, there are a lot of loopholes, and these loopholes are essentially the flexibility mechanism with the other sectors, the sectors that are not included under the ESR. So member states essentially can use credits that they have in the carbon market sectors or in the land use and forestry sectors to comply with the ESR targets. That means that emission reduction in some sectors of the economy become alternatives to climate action in other sectors. And this, of course, undermines the goal of overachieving and stepping up climate action. In fact, in order to stay in line with the Paris Agreement goal, the whole ambition of the Fit for 55 package should be higher. So when we talk, in the case of the ESR, at least we should avoid to hollow out the targets that we have there. There's also another loopholes under the ESR, so not only the loopholes with other sectors, but also the loopholes that consist into safety reserve. So let's say it's a pot of credits that countries with lower income can use to comply. So when we account for the effect of these loopholes, our analysis, G&E analysis, shows that if they're used to the maximum extent, we will miss the 2030 target for the ESR by a whopping 7 percentage points. So instead of 40% of emission reduction by 2040, we will achieve only 33%. And what the EP can do now, so it will vote on the report next week. We see that there are good elements. There's been an improvement compared to the Commission text, because, for example, the environmental committee that adopted the report is going to set a lower amount of a lower total amount of climate damages emissions that can still be emitted from now on up to 2030. It gives also more transparency and more teeth to the corrective process that put countries back on track if they're not making sufficient progress towards the targets. It limits some of the flexibilities. What's sad is that the ambitions of the report could have been higher, because all the loopholes I mentioned are still there, and they are going to hollow out the targets. There are not strong consequences in the case of non-compliance. So there are not strong mechanisms that don't let member states off the hook, and this is a danger. And then the governance rules altogether, they could be improved, for example, by giving the ESR a long-term perspective. It could be linked to climate neutrality, requiring that member states set national climate neutrality targets. And of course, also the rules governing the climate and energy plannings of the countries could be strengthened.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Chiara, and really showing that, I mean, also, of course, on this file, the devil is really in the details. So, like, even if the target level itself is not undermined, now there's a lot of flexibility, and these loopholes that are actually threatening, you mentioned, by 7% the achievement of the overall target. So, of course, that's a major concern also for the EU's overall climate ambition. And I just saw also that Michael Bloss joined. Micha, I don't know. I hope you can hear us. And
I hear you.
Okay, brilliant. Maybe I can also quickly give you the floor for a few minutes. So we just had discussions on the ETS and free allowance, and we're now a bit in the effort sharing regulation segment. But I think it would still be useful to also get your take maybe on the challenge, what is on the table, maybe relating to also this overall EU ambition and kind of the alignment of EU climate policies with the 1.5 degree goal.
Sorry, I did not get the.
So the question would just be why do you think next week's votes are so critical in the context of raising EU overall ambition? What is at stake in the plenary votes? Sorry, can you hear me? Or is maybe my mic failing?
I can hear you, Klaus.
Okay. Micha, maybe then it might be on your end, some technical issues. Otherwise, we can also try again in a couple of minutes if that is fine. Then I would just maybe check in with Rachel first, just to see if there were any DMs coming in that we should address.
Yes, so we've had one in from Nina, and she would like to know, so what's next? So after the vote in Parliament next week, what comes after that?
Okay, great. Chiara, do you want to maybe come on, respond to this? I guess this is for all the files, but I mean, it will be similar, of course, with the effort sharing regulation and the others. Yeah.
Sure, I can come in. So after the vote in plenary, we have the other co-legislator, which is the Council of the European Union, to also adopt its position. And for the climate file, for a climate file like the ESR, for example, this will likely happen on the 28th of June during the meeting of the environmental ministers of the EU. So after the adoption of positions by the European Parliament and the Council, the next step is what is called the trialogue, which is the process where the Council, the Parliament, and the Commission come together and try to find an agreement on a final text for the law.
Great, thanks a lot for this overview. I think there might still be some technical issues with Micha, but maybe we can already move then to the last segment, which is on the LULUCF, or the land use and forestry regulation. So the third block, basically, that will be voted on next week, and which doesn't treat climate mitigation, but actually treats kind of the mirror side of it, the other side of the coin, the removals and sinks. So here, of course, strengthening this regulation would also give the EU the power to absorb more emissions than it has been doing in the past. But it's a bit of a sick child of the EU recently, and a lot of concerns raised, especially from member states, about the capacity to strengthen it. But definitely one kind of key policy instrument that we should not look over. So maybe here I would like again to bring in Alex Mason from WWF office. Maybe to also walk us a bit through this piece of legislation. What is at stake here, and what do we need to do, or what are we expecting? What should members of the European Parliament do about this LULUCF regulation next week?
Yes, thank you. So LULUCF is a great acronym, isn't it? It's land use change and forestry. And so this regulation covers all of the emissions and removals in the land use sector, carbon dioxide emissions, from forests and cropland, grasslands, wetlands in future, and so on. And historically, this LULUCF sector has been a net sink. So there are emissions, including a lot of emissions from peatlands, which have been drained, but the forestry sector is a very significant net sink, principally because we've been cutting down forests for hundreds of years, and over the last few decades they've been recovering. We have forests that are growing and therefore have been absorbing more carbon than they put out. But the sink has been declining over the last several years, and under current rules would continue to decline. I mean, that's partly because forests are growing older and therefore becoming richer in carbon, but also because we've been extracting a lot more wood from forests, and that's partly as a result of the EU's completely insane bioenergy policies, which incentivize things that increase emissions compared to fossil fuels, but also increased harvests for products, which overall is less beneficial than not harvesting forests. And as I said, the projection is for the LULUCF sink to continue to decline. Under the Commission's proposal, that would be reversed. The Commission has proposed a target of 310 million tonnes net removals for the LULUCF sector. But we think that, given the climate emergency we face, in addition, obviously, to cutting fossil fuel emissions very rapidly, we need to go much faster on removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And this is something that also will help, if done right, will help us tackle the biodiversity crisis, because protecting and restoring forests and other natural ecosystems will both sequester carbon and improve the situation for biodiversity and ecosystems. And we think there's significantly more potential than the Commission has estimated. I mean, I think if you took the climate emergency seriously and were prepared to make significant changes to how we use land, so to farming and forestry practices, by having much more agroforest, by re-wetting the small areas in the EU that are peatlands, so organic soils, and by significantly reducing the amount of wood we extract from forests and moving closer to nature forestry, we think you could achieve much higher targets than 310 million tonnes. I mean, we've been calling for a target for 2030 of 600 million tonnes. The European Parliament Environment Council has voted to support 310 million tonnes plus an additional 50 to be delivered through carbon farming, so agricultural practices that increase carbon storage and sequestration in soils, for example. So we think that's certainly better than the Commission proposal, and we'd urge all MEPs in the plenary vote to support that, and in fact to support all of the amendments that the Green Rapporteur, Vilde Minister, negotiated and that were passed by the Environment Committee, including in relation to how LULUCF relates to other sectors. And I think one of the key points for us is that the LULUCF sector is not like other sectors. It's very difficult to measure accurate emissions and removals from soils, for example, and in forests. And so we can't treat removals or net removals in the land use sector as simply ton for ton directly equivalent to fossil fuel emissions or emissions from fertilizer and so on. And that's why we feel very strongly that the scientific evidence says you should keep the LULUCF sector separate, as a separate pillar, and therefore we're pleased that the Environment Committee has rejected the Commission's idea of lumping agriculture emissions from fertilizer and livestock together with the LULUCF sector to create what people have called an AFOLU sector, agriculture, forestry and other land use, and also to restrict some of the additional offsetting that the Commission had proposed with the effort sharing regulation. But ideally we'd like the plenary to go further and to completely delete what the Commission euphemistically refers to as flexibility between the LULUCF sector and the effort sharing regulation sectors, because this simply allows member states to use carbon credits from the land use sector, which they are hard to measure and uncertain and could be reversed through natural disturbances, and use those to do less essentially on cutting fossil fuel and agriculture emissions. So we think that that's something that should be deleted.
Thanks a lot, Alex. Yeah, indeed, source of lots of abbreviations as well, the AFOLU, the LULUCF, but also, of course, good to underline this kind of parallel objectives that can be achieved with a stronger LULUCF regulation that can also have positive impacts not only on addressing climate action, but also biodiversity protection. I think that is a very, very important point as well to raise. I see we are already a bit over time, but if you bear with us still for a few minutes, I would still like to give another try to give the floor to Michael Bloss, who has reconnected. Micha, maybe this is more of a wrap-up or kind of a summary. I mean, we've seen potential, as Alex mentioned now, that the Parliament could strengthen the sink potential of the EU through the LULUCF regulation, but there's also, of course, the amendment in the emissions trading system to increase the emission for mitigation, which will be quite a big battle, obviously, next week in the plenary. How do you see these kind of fights about really increasing, strengthening these files and increasing the overall ambition going ahead? Please.
I hope you hear me now.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Great. So let's be fast. I mean, we are really lowering ambitions from what we have achieved in ENVI. But I would say until next week, let's fight. And as you said, there are some possibilities of fighting in LULUCF. We can actually make it happen to increase the ambition beyond 55%. That would be great. Also, when it comes to the rebasing and the overall ambition in the ETS1, here we see currently an amendment from EPP and Renew on the table that splits the rebasing into two parts. 70 million tons in 2024 and then another 50 in 2026. This would be bad, but here we are also, I mean, first of all, we are trying to achieve a majority like we did for the 60% in the climate law for the position of the ENVI on rebasing. Let's make it happen. Then the fallback position is really to split the kind of conservative middle center right amendments. Let's make this happen. Let's work on this. And thirdly, we are trying currently to introduce something like a minimum price, of carbon floor price, because we're seeing that, like there's a lot of things happening to bring prices down, the MSR, 250 million allowances, the restriction to market access, the increased price hike mechanism. So we also need to really have something to make sure that the price is not falling. So we propose a 60 euro and then increasing with the LRF every year. Also here, we can still win this, and such a price would also really drive out coal production in all over Europe around the year 2030. So yeah, I mean, we should be still in the fighting mode until next week. Still, I mean, it's clear that like the 1.5 degree goal somehow is gone with what is on the table right now, and that also shows that we need to mobilize again for the next election, because the European Parliament called for a climate emergency, but then when it really comes to concrete issues, we see that the EPP and Renew are more siding with ECR than with the Greens and with SD, and this is really a problem we have to change. So I hope you understood me now, and thanks for inviting me to this Twitter space.
Yeah, thanks a lot for joining, and a very strong appel or strong encouragement that the battle is still ongoing. And of course, we will also do our best to support the ENVI outcome for a much more or a better ambition increase of the ETS. But yeah, very good reminder that we have to really focus on MEPs, that they walk the talk and don't move away from the promises that they gave over the last years. So I think we are reaching the end of this discussion. So thank you again, everybody. Thanks to all the experts that were able to join today, all the people that have listened in. And just maybe a quick note, there's also going to be a recording of the session. So we will then follow up also with sharing this recording. And yeah, can keep your eyes open on the Twitter space in general, the Twitter universe. We have a lot of Twitter material as well to put pressure on MEPs for next week, so that they actually walk the talk and that they make the Fit for 55 into a Fit for 1.5 as much as still possible. So thanks, everybody. Have a good day and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.